Hey guys, I just wanted to let you know that my long distance girlfriend will be staying for a week in a few days. It will slightly affect my production schedule, but not my upload schedule, because I am significantly ahead of schedule in terms of like uploads and things like that. But yeah, it will mean I'll be taking basically a whole week off. But you know, I think I'll do like the odd couple of bits of work kind of when there's some downtime, because I love working on this channel and other things. So just wanted to let you know that that will be happening. But also, I think I will try to do a video actually featuring my girlfriend, recording a video of her, and if there is any interest in it, then I think it would be a Q&A, possibly even a live Q&A. But just to get the ball rolling, let's start with, if you have any questions immediately in your head right now, feel free to put those in the comments. Anyway, on with the video. Right, so my plan is to break this down into 3 sections. 1, why did this happen? 2, what are some likely outcomes going to be in the future? And 3, what should we do? We, of course, referring to the West, from a kind of moral perspective with all of this stuff going on. But before that, I do just want to give some context, which I think is relevant to women when it comes to Islam and what Islam has to say about women. Also, before that, I just want to say that I'm wearing another like t-shirt with writing on it, and it's also something which really doesn't reflect who I am as a person, because it says squats. I thought you said let's do shots. Now, the reluctance to do squats is kind of true, because I did actually pull my quad recently and it hurt like quite a lot. So my reluctance to do squats, okay, fair enough, but I am actually teetotal, so there we go, I wouldn't really be doing shots. So in Sahih Bukhari, volume 1, number 301, we have this little story. Once Allah's apostle went out to do a particular prayer, he passed by the women and said, "O women, give alms, as I have seen that the majority of the dwellers of hellfire were you, women." They asked, "Why is it so, O Allah's apostle?" He replied, "You curse frequently and are ungrateful to your husbands. I have not seen anyone more deficient in intelligence and religion than you. A cautious, sensible man could be led astray by some of you." The women asked, "O Allah's apostle, what is deficient in our intelligence and religion?" He said, "Is not the evidence of 2 women equal to the witness of 1 man?" They replied in the affirmative. He said, "This is the deficiency in her intelligence. Isn't it true that a woman can neither pray nor fast during her menses?" The woman replied in the affirmative. He said, "This is the deficiency in her religion." So there's 3 things I want to unpack there. The first thing is how absolutely trans-exclusionary this is by assuming that only women have periods. But also, of course, the fact that it's implying that the fact that women have periods is evidence of a deficiency, a spiritual deficiency, which is lovely. The second thing I want to touch on is the argument that because a woman's witness is worth half that of a man's, it is evidence of her lack of intelligence. And I find that interesting because there's also this in Sahih Bukhari, volume 3, number 826. The Prophet said, "Isn't the witness of a woman equal to half that of a man?" The woman said yes. He said, "This is because of the deficiency of a woman's mind." So what I like about this is that you basically have 2 parts of the same hadith collection, which form like a circular argument, where you say, a woman is intellectually inferior to a man, and here's my evidence for that. Her witness is half that of a man. And you say, well, why is a woman's witness half that of a man? Well, because a woman is less intelligent than a man. And I think there's something deliciously ironic about attacking women's intelligence while simultaneously making a logically circular argument that's just utterly fallacious. But the main thing I want to touch on is this claim that the majority of the inhabitants of hell are women. Something I like to ask Muslim women when I get the opportunity is, what are you excited about? You believe Islam is true. What are you excited about in the afterlife? And it's interesting because they can't really give a very clear response to that question. For a Christian, it's obvious. The appeal of the afterlife is that you get to spend eternity celebrating the inherent goodness of God. And you can say maybe that's a bit vague, maybe it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but it is an answer that can easily be given. You would say, God is good, God is loving, God just radiates out happiness and bliss and peace, and I just want to live in his presence. Now in Islam, the vision of the afterlife is a lot more carnal. You know, it's a little bit more like the Playboy Mansion. Interestingly, also featuring things that are considered immoral on earth. So, for example, in Islam, you're not supposed to drink wine. It used to be you're not supposed to drink wine to the point of getting drunk, and then it became you're not supposed to drink wine full stop, as there was like a progressive revelation. But in heaven, in Islam, you can drink as much wine as you want. So, and you know, there are some restrictions on the sexual activity of men on earth, and even then they're not particularly stringent. But even those small number of restrictions are effectively completely done away with in heaven as well. So basically, the Islamic view of heaven is just completely carnal, and it's the idea that just all of your pleasures and desires will just be completely satisfied if you're a man. The issue is that, first of all, for women, as this verse shows, chances are they're not even getting to heaven, they're going to hell. But even this doesn't fully communicate how bad the situation is for Muslim women, and for that you'd have to look at Sunan Ibn Majah 4337. There is no one whom Allah will admit to heaven, but Allah will marry him to 72 wives, 2 from Houris, and 70 from his inheritance from the people of hell, all of whom will have desirable front passages, and he will have a male member that never becomes flaccid. So basically what this is saying is that if you are a Muslim man, the man is kind of implied, then when you get to heaven, you will get your 72 virgins, and the Houris are basically like spiritual kind of sex nymphs. I don't know, like basically kind of adjacent to genies. And also, by the way, there is some evidence within like the Islamic texts to suggest that there will be genies in heaven, and also perhaps that genies will also get 72 partners in heaven. But then you get this other one of the 70 of from his inheritance, or of his inheritance from the people of hell. Now what this is basically saying is that in the same way that in a war, it was often the case when the Quran was being written, that if you defeated your opponents, you would take their wives as captives, as sex slaves. The same thing will happen in heaven, but this time the punishment for a Christian man or a Jewish man, or indeed an atheist man, is that not only will he go to hell, but his wives and daughters will be taken by Muslim men as their sex slaves for eternity. Which on the surface is already pretty not great, I would say. So basically, if you're a non-Muslim woman, and Islam is true, which is a pretty big if on the second point, then what you have to look forward to in the afterlife is an eternity of being a Muslim man's sex slave in heaven. Now, I would just say that while I was looking up this hadith, just to get my quote for it, I did see an article that was trying to basically discredit it as a problem for Muslims, and its only argument was saying, well, this hadith has a weak rating, and therefore, and the actual words it says, or the actual word it said was, weak hadiths should be ignored by Muslims. And that's not true. And if that was the case, why would they even be there? Like, I really genuinely enjoy that take of just, yeah, we have these hadith that are in our collections of hadith, and they're just there to be ignored. No. The reality is that what a weak rating means for a hadith is that it had enough people affirming it as a genuine statement of Muhammad or one of his companions, but it didn't have as many as some of the stronger hadiths. So basically, it's just a way of saying all of the hadith have past the Islamic standard of the authentic chain of narrators saying, I heard that from blah 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 said this, but some of them don't have quite as many links, quite as many branches in that little tree of narrations. But yeah, it's to say like it should not be taken seriously or it should be ignored is just complete nonsense. And also, like, the thing is, you could say maybe that you can not pay too much attention to a weak hadith if there is something else to disagree with it. But I just think it's worth stressing that Islam in general is quite pro sex slavery. So in the Quran itself, it says that basically it talks about Muslim men, and it says, those who guard their chastity except with their wives and those bondwomen in their possession. That's Surah 23 verses 5 to 6. And basically what it's saying there is that Muslim men shouldn't commit adultery, but they are allowed to have sex with their wives and also with their female captives, their sex slaves. And also there is this passage from Sunan Abu Dawood, volume 2, 2150. It says, some of the companions of the Apostle of Allah were reluctant to have intercourse with the female captives in the presence of their husbands who were unbelievers. So Allah, the Exalted, sent down the Quranic verse, and all married women are forbidden unto you, save those captives whom your right hand possesses. That is to say, they are lawful for them when they complete with their waiting period. So just a slight thing I want to stress there, which is that it's basically saying not only can you have sex with your female captives, you can have sex with them in front of their husbands, is the implication of that, because the men were reluctant to have sex with their female captives in front of the husbands of these female captives who had themselves now been taken captive. So basically it's saying it doesn't matter whether or not the husbands are there, you can rape, that is the word for it, these sex slaves in front of their husbands, and of course the husbands can't do anything about it. So with all that said, there's no reason to think that this hadith is not authentic when it says that out of the 72 virgins, perpetual virgins, who the Muslim men will get in heaven, 70 of them will be non-Muslims. But the final point worth considering in this regard is the fact that we've also been told that the majority of the inhabitants of hell are women, which is interesting because if there are a very large number of non-Muslim women in heaven as the sex slaves of Muslim men, then in order for there to still be a majority of the women being in hell, that would have to mean that a huge number of Muslim women are going to hell. In fact, you would almost suspect that perhaps every single Muslim woman is going to hell based on the combination of these two statements. That one, the majority of the inhabitants of hell are women, and two, that most non-Muslim women will be in heaven as the perpetual sex slaves of Muslim men. I remember the first time I kind of went down this line of inquiry when talking to a Muslim woman. It was because she described herself specifically as a proud Muslim woman. She said, I'm a proud Muslim woman. It was around the time when Donald Trump had just become elected president. And I kind of thought to myself, you can't really be all three of those things. You know, you can be a proud Muslim, but you can't be a proud woman at the same time, because the things that Islam has to say about women should not be a source of pride for anyone, unless you're saying that you're proud about the fact that you're going to be in hell while your husband has sex with his sex slaves for all eternity, or you're proud about the fact that your prophet, who you consider to be the perfect example for all humanity, literally said that you are deficient in religion because you have a menstrual cycle. and also that you're apparently half as intelligent as a man, even though he himself used terrible logic to arrive at that conclusion. I don't really see how you can be a proud woman and a Muslim. Now, what you could do is you could say, well, actually, all of that stuff, it's just nonsense. All of this stuff about Muslim women being less intelligent and inferior in religion, all of that stuff about Muslim men having sex with their inheritance from non-Muslims for all eternity, all of the stuff that you could possibly object to in Islam is just nonsense. But in that case, you're saying that all of your top Islamic scholars are idiots and unreliable. You're saying that Muhammad was terrible at communicating his message, and you're saying that Allah was completely, your God was organizing a complete shambles of a prophetic lineage and a revelation if he completely failed to communicate anything close to what he actually meant. So at that point, I could say, okay, maybe you can say you're a proud woman, but you can't say you're a proud Muslim. If you're saying that your entire religion is basically just a complete shambles of incoherence and contradiction. So when we talk about the Taliban taking over Afghanistan, and we talk about what this means for the women in Afghanistan, I think it's a very good question, but it's a question which I don't think you can really divorce from the broader question of what does Islam mean for women in general. Because according to Islam, the women in Afghanistan will now be living in something close to paradise. According to the women in Afghanistan, assuming that, they are Muslim, the men who are marching in to establish this Islamic State are pretty reminiscent of Muhammad, who, also established an Islamic State by overthrowing the existing government where he lived. And he's considered the example to all men. So I think it's quite difficult to talk about the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban without talking about the fundamental incoherence of trying to act as if you care about women's rights while also accepting the authenticity of those women's claims to be Muslim. Personally, I think a pretty empowering message would be to say that these women don't really have an authentic claim to being Muslim. I think that Aisha, Muhammad's child bride, is one of my favorite well, actually, there's no one of about it compared to all the other people. My favorite character in the early narrative of Islam's kind of rise to power, because she not only was super powerful and stuff, but she was also really sassy. There's a bit in Sahih al-Bukhari volume 6, number 311, where she says, "I feel that your Lord hastens in fulfilling your desires and wishes to Muhammad." And I think when you actually look at the wider context of what was going on in Muhammad's life in relation to his wives, that just that verse comes across as just so deliciously sassy, basically. Because you've got to bear in mind, there are stories of Muhammad having sex with, he had sex with one of his sex slaves, and his wives disagreed with it. So he promised never to do it. He said, "I'm never going to have sex with this sex slave again." And then he got a revelation from Allah that said, "Why do you deny for yourself what Allah has made lawful for you?" Basically saying, in other words, that God was literally saying to Muhammad, "Hey, don't deny yourself the right to have sex with your sex slaves. I command you, God, command you to have sex with your sex slaves." And Muhammad's basically had to go to his wife and say, "Hey, sorry, I've got to keep having sex with whoever I like because Allah commanded it for me." And then when you read that, it's just very funny to see Aisha be like, "I see that your God hastens to fulfill your wishes and desires." And it's yeah, it does seem like that. And it's just I don't know, it just comes across as just such great energy to just it feels so much like she's just calling him out right there. And I mean, there are other things the fact that Aisha there's like some suspicion that Aisha was actually an adulteress. And it just so happens that when Muhammad was basically dying, a tame sheep, and this is again from the Islamic sources, a tame sheep snuck into the tent and ate some of the Quran. And it happened to be the bits about how adulterers or adulteresses should be stoned. So there was also similarly was eaten a bit about how apparently grown women should breastfeed adult men. That was also apparently in there, according to Aisha, and that got eaten as well. So I don't know. It's just how can you not love Aisha? She just seems like she was just really funny in everything she did. Like I just love the idea that she completely saw through Muhammad and then cheated on him and then just fed the verse that said, like, how is that not the most alpha thing in the world to literally feed the verse that says that you should be stoned to a sheep while your husband is, I think it was actually shortly after he died, and they were like, so your husband's like barely even cold and you're just there feeding his divine revelation to a sheep. So yeah, anyway, I guess what I'm saying is like there is kind of a empowering place for women within the narrative of Islam and within kind of the wider context of living in the Islamic world. And that is to emulate Aisha, who basically, I think, totally saw through Muhammad's nonsense and basically just disregarded the idea that this supposed revelation was of any worth at all. And I think that what we need to be seeing is Afghan women just rising up and just feeding the Quran to their sheep. And I think that's the only way you're going to kind of see like women's rights being taken seriously. What I don't think you can do is have like people like Ash Sakar talking about like how proud they are as Muslims and how like, you know, it's really terrible for people to be Islamophobic and stuff, and then saying that they support women's rights. I don't think you can make that work, because the problem is you're building the entire foundation of your critique of the Taliban on like ignorance and contradiction. I think what I'm basically saying is that I consider a lot of the criticism of the Taliban to be basically kind of hollow, because it's like, if you're criticizing the Taliban, but you don't really have any consideration for the interplay between what the Islamic sources actually say and what the Taliban are doing, then I don't really care what you think or really about any of your analysis. You know, like, what's the point in the discussion? You know, and you can, if you like, you can try to make it work so that the Quran and the Hadith do come together to form a empowering, feminist, progressive message. You know, good luck with that, genuinely. But what I don't think you can do is just be like, yeah, let's talk about the Taliban. Let's try to come up with some takes on what the Taliban taking over means, but let's not pay any attention at all to the actual religion that the Taliban upholds. And, you know, what I would say is how accurately and faithfully the Taliban seem to be responding to the texts of their religion. So the reason I say all of that as context is because I think it matters. Like, I would feel disingenuous going into an analysis of the Taliban without like saying, hey, here's how I understand the religion that the Taliban upholds. And it's kind of just like, what I'm saying is it seems bizarre to me that anybody would not do that. It seems bizarre to me that people would start talking about ISIS, start talking about the Taliban, start talking about Al-Qaeda, and not be like, oh, and here's what I think about the actual, you know, their professed reason why they're doing this stuff. But with all of that said, I do sort of want to transition quite substantially to my other interest, aside from comparative religious studies and gender politics issues, to talk about international relations, because that is actually what my degree is in. So it would make sense to me to talk about that. And I want to talk about how did this happen? Just quite quickly, but I just want to stress like some key points. First of all, it's worth noting that Afghanistan was a relatively stable country at the beginning of the 20th century. It was led by a guy called, I believe, Ramallah Khan. I am confident enough in saying that I don't feel the need to look it up, but it might be Ramanullah or something like that. I think I'm roughly correct, and if I'm completely wrong, they'll probably have like a soundtrack little thing as I show his actual name, but I'm probably roughly on point. Anyway, he was basically kind of like following on from the same tradition of like vaguely secular, sort of liberal democratic-ish leaders of the Middle East. I read in a book that apparently he wanted to institute a constitution in 1919 that would have given women the right to vote in Afghanistan. However, I have reached a point now of being healthily suspicious of things that I read in just random books, especially when I'm aware that they might be written by ideologues who are possibly the same kind of people who might say things like that Muhammad was the world's first feminist and things like that. So I am, and I looked up to see whether or not this is true, and I can't find any other evidence of this claim that this guy wanted to give women the vote in 1919. However, regardless of that, he certainly was no Taliban leader. He was basically somebody who was setting setting Afghanistan kind of down the right track. He was making it kind of unified. He was making it, basically something like a liberal democracy. I don't want to say with absolute confidence how close to it that was, and I certainly don't want to be one of those people who was like, the whole Middle East was one massive liberal democracy filled with human rights and everything before the evil West showed up. Because I think that's a simplistic narrative, and I tend to reject such simplistic narratives. But he was getting there. He was close. He was better than what you've seen in a lot of the Middle East up until that point, and a lot since. By the way, I realize that Afghanistan technically isn't exactly the Middle East, but it's so border, kind of so close that I'm just going to use the term Middle East, so get over it. Anyway, so basically having like an established Afghan state right on the border of British India was bad for the UK, because they didn't want to have an organised, independent Afghan opposition. So they thought, how about we intentionally fund various destabilizing influences in Afghanistan? And Afghanistan, like I say, not with a strong history of like liberal democratic tradition behind it, there were plenty of opportunities to fund such destabilizing influences. And the UK basically, and this was kind of in the 1920s, I believe that the rule of this Ramanullah Khan basically completely fell away in 1929. So during 1920s, the UK funded radical Islamic clerics and other kind of tribal groups and things like that. But basically, that was the beginning of, the UK kind of created the idea of the organised radical Islamic opposition to, by the way, I wouldn't say radical, I would just say Orthodox Islamic, but whatever. Orthodox Islamic opposition to the liberal democratic state that was once Afghanistan. And the UK have, of course, done this several other times. They did it with the Sauds in Arabia. And also, they did it in Yemen. And I just have to give this a mention because it was what my dissertation was about. Basically, the Mutawakilite kingdom in Yemen was a kind of monarchic theocracy, similar to Saudi Arabia. And the Yemeni Arab Republic was kind of rose up in opposition to that, and it wanted to establish, again, something a lot more secular, more liberal, and more democratic. Again, I am always hesitant about implying that the Arab world was just forever on the verge of becoming some kind of epic liberal democracy to rival the West. were it not for the British just constantly frustrating them. I think it would have been a difficult process either way, but it was definitely a key step in that direction. And of course, the British enthusiastically supported the Mutawakkilite Yemeni Arab kingdom, and in the end they lost. So good, that's good. I mean, well, they lost, and then obviously things still went kind of bad anyway. So maybe this is an example of what I mean when I say you can't really have simplistic narratives, but which is why I thought it was an interesting thing, which is why I wrote my dissertation about it. Anyway, the important thing is, why did this happen? Well, it happened because the Western powers have a direct interest in keeping the Middle East destabilized. That's the truth. That's the answer to the question. If you didn't know, there we go. There's also the fact, of course, that if the Soviet Union had successfully kind of taken over Afghanistan, which is to say supported the communist Afghan government there, chances are it would be a lot more secular, which would be nice for women. Again, would it have been a liberal democracy? Probably not. Again, I've said it several times now, so I'm not going to say it again. But yeah, it probably wouldn't have been a liberal democracy. But it would have been a lot better for a lot of the people living in Afghanistan. And say what you will about the Soviet Union, they generally were not imperialists in the same way that the West have historically been. They were interested in kind of spreading their ideology, but also in self-determination for the countries they tended to get involved in. My take, and this might frustrate some of my hardcore tanky fans, is that I don't think you can claim that the USSR or China ever really escaped the kind of tendency of nation states towards imperialism and attempting to maximize their power on the global stage. So sorry about that. Anyway, of course, everybody knows that the United States literally supported the Mujahideen, which were the Muslims who opposed communism. And nowadays, like, Muslims really don't like communism. Osama bin Laden complained about communism a lot. It's kind of like, I guess it kind of creates like a weird situation for a lot of kind of Western chauvinists who kind of view it as being like two sides in this battle. The reality is that, like, there is no connection between like the Soviet Union communism and modern Islamic orthodoxy. They're totally diametrically opposed, just as much as either of them are diametrically opposed to Western capitalism. But actually, of course, we know that communism isn't diametrically opposed to capitalism, but rather is just the completion of the capitalist mode of production. So that's how we got here. Just throw in a couple of pointless wars and I guess like a massive waste of time, which was the last 20 years. And now, boom, Afghanistan has fallen. So let's talk about what will happen. A lot of people are kind of like saying, is China going to take over? And here's my take. Yeah, probably. Basically, you know, I don't want to say with absolute confidence what will happen, but this is what will happen. China is not going to go to war in Afghanistan. Okay, well, first of all, let's just clarify something. There are several competing interests in Afghanistan, and these are they. One, the West, because obviously, like, we've just had a 20-year war there. It's something we have some investment in. But I don't know. We'll get into that in a second. So two is Turkey. Now, Turkey, like almost every other country I'm about to mention, doesn't have a direct investment in Afghanistan, but they do have an interest in Central Asia. And the reason why is because I think Turkish policy is generally to always have the suggestion of pan-Turkism on the table. So if you don't know, most of Central Asia is Turkic, and therefore it's nice for Turkey to know that they kind of have that like association. They can be like, hey, you know, pan-Turkism, it's always there as an option. I think for that reason, Turkey likes to maintain some interest in Central Asia. But realistically, I think Turkey, they're basically like 2 seas away. They'd have to kind of like connect to Azerbaijan somehow. And then also, which, you know, would be like, they'd kind of have to negotiate through Armenia, which would be a bit difficult. And then they'd have to cross the Caspian in order to get to Central Asia. But like I say, it's always a nice idea to have on the table, and therefore I think they'd be a bit annoyed if they saw other countries involving themselves in Central Asia in a kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess domineering way. Now, if China get involved in Afghanistan, it would be hard, I think, for countries not to interpret that as kind of a move into Central Asia more generally. And that's the key thing for the other things I'm going to mention. So, number 3, Russia. Russia, they are, very interested in trying to maintain good relations with and kind of retain like some sense of, not exactly control, but certainly cooperation with the former territories of the USSR. Obviously, Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and the other one, Turkmenistan, there we go, were part of the USSR. I think that Russia, they want to maintain some semblance of like a relationship, some semblance of cooperation in that area, and that obviously is going to put them into conflict with China if China, again, tries to involve itself or appears to be trying to involve itself in Central Asia. Number 4, India. So here's the thing with India. India doesn't like Pakistan. I hope this isn't news to you. Basically, India is kind of like sort of friendly with Central Asia. But China is more friendly with Pakistan because they both hate India. Now, if China got involved in Central Asia, then that would be bad news for India, because that would mean that China and Pakistan would be like buddies, and suddenly like it's just hard to conceptualize just how horrible that would be for India. Like that would be India's worst nightmare, to have like China exert a lot of influence over Central Asia by involving themselves a lot in Afghanistan, in doing so forming an even stronger relationship with Pakistan, and obviously just like, I don't know, like I would struggle to imagine India not getting very uncomfortable and possibly trying to mobilize for war. Like genuinely, like I don't see, it's hard to say because obviously there's like nuclear weapons there, but it's just like India would be so angry if this was happening. I think, to be fair, they probably wouldn't mobilize for war because they would recognize that China doesn't really want war with India. Like none of them really want war with each other. It's basically, it's a mini Cold War. But the edge that China would get if they really started to involve themselves in Central Asia, certainly India would try to frustrate that a lot. And I guess the 5th thing to consider is, of course, the global like Muslim world. So China has kind of annoyed parts of the Muslim world by, running, some might say concentration camps, some might say whatever kind of camps, in East Turkestan or Xinjiang, I don't know how we call it, the Uyghurs. So basically, it's important to note that I think most nations have not really taken a stance on it because China makes all of the world's stuff. So just to kind of work, I don't know if I'm going to work backwards. No, let's not work backwards. But basically, I think this is actually kind of going to be an overblown thing. I've already kind of hinted at the fact that I think Pakistan would be perfectly happy to be friendly with China. Basically, all of the leaders of every single country in the world are massive, self-interested hypocrites who don't really care about anything. I think that's one thing we've learned from like the history of politics. And therefore, I think it's very unlikely that there's going to be any like Muslim leaders taking a principled stance against China involving themselves in Afghanistan. But what there could be is, and let's not forget that the like terrorist cells and things like that are relevant international actors. I'm sorry, my realist friends aren't going to want to hear that, but it's true. They are relevant. So with that said, China would probably like be setting themselves kind of almost back to square one. Like I think they're kind of getting control over the whole situation in Xinjiang. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, to be honest. Xinjiang. I think Xinjiang. Let's go for that. I think they're kind of getting a hold of that situation. Obviously, there was a lot of anger from the Uyghurs living there. I think China are just getting a hold of the situation, and I think they would be kind of setting themselves back to square one by getting involved in Afghanistan and basically find themselves in the same situation. Now, let's just acknowledge something though. China, they really got a hold of the situation in Xinjiang, it seems. Xinjiang. Let's just try to get it right, come on. So with that said, it seems like China has already kind of proven themselves when it comes to dealing with belligerence from Muslim populations. So that suggests they could be doing okay. I think like the reality is that China doesn't have the issue of trying to be a Western liberal democracy. And because of that, they're much better equipped to frustrate terrorism. Like terrorism doesn't really work against dictatorships, not very well, because the main benefit of terrorism is that you force the hand of the state to make the state enact increasingly draconian measures, and that causes the people within the state to get angry because they think, oh no, we're being subject to all these draconian measures. That's not good. Significantly, if you already live in a dictatorship where there is no kind of history of people expecting liberal democracy, they're not going to respond as negatively to draconian measures being implemented, which makes it just much easier for the state to react to terrorism. Really, people are going to talk about kind of similar examples, but I don't think the United States and the United Kingdom could get away with like just outright saying we're going to have re-education camps for radical Muslims or significant portions of the Muslim population, let's say. And because of that, it means they have to operate with a handful of hands tied behind their back when it comes to how they're going to deal with insurrection in their country. So there we go. I think that's kind of something that benefits China. Now, something else that needs to be stressed is that China is not going to go to war in Afghanistan. What China are going to do is they're going to find what did I already say? I said that the leaders of countries are self-interested. They're not principled. They don't care about anything. They only care about lining their own pockets. So what's China going to do? It's going to find the officials in the Taliban government and the Taliban regime who care about money, and they're going to make deals with those people, and they're going to use those deals as a precedent to invest in the country, the same way that they've been doing in Africa, particularly. Basically, they're going to move in Chinese companies to make goods and stuff and run services, and they're also going to import some significant proportion of the Chinese population. And they're probably then going to import some Chinese soldiers to protect their population. They're probably going to say, we want to invest in Afghanistan. And then they're going to kind of invest economically in the area, invest in terms of infrastructure and things like that. And then some proportion of the workforce they're going to use is going to be Chinese. And then they're going to say, but we're at risk of being attacked by certain discontented Afghan people. So we need to have some security forces in there to defend our population. So that's how they're going to kind of establish a foothold. I think. I don't see how that would not be how they're going to do it. And then from there, I think it's just going to be a matter of slowly increasing their influence in Afghanistan. And then once they've done that, they're going to look towards Central Asia. And I mean, they're going to face all the problems I described. I think there's going to be a lot of like different sides supporting different other sides. I think kind of hilariously, I could almost see like some Western countries unironically supporting like Islamic radicals in Afghanistan again in order to try to frustrate China's efforts to establish themselves there, which I think would just be like, it's so predictable that you just have to laugh. That's probably what's going to happen. Of course, the thing is like anything could happen. Like you can't say with certain like, oh, this is what's going to happen. Who knows? The real question is, what should the West do? Nothing. I don't see how we can. Like, we've been there for 20 years and we achieved nothing. Even if you could make an argument that there could be something to be gained by going there, clearly the West is not in a position to gain anything from going there when we were just there for 20 years and didn't gain anything. I think maybe the argument that the West should go into Afghanistan in a military capacity would be convincing any time other than when the West have just been in Afghanistan in a military capacity for the past 20 years and achieved nothing. I think the problem is that, like, the era of Western superpower is just, it feels kind of over. I mean, one, I think the West just has, like, so many internal problems that just, are we really gonna go halfway around the world to fight a war again? I don't see that happening. And the other issue being, why would we, when, as I kind of already pointed out, there isn't really a coherent opposition? Like, what would really be the point in the West getting involved when there's already so many disparate forces that are already opposed to each other? There's just nothing for the West to really gain from the whole situation, as I see it. I think the big problem with the West is that the West is crap. The West doesn't have an coherent kind of goal, is kind of my perception. When I think about, like, so the West, we're going to go to war in Afghanistan to do what? This is kind of, I guess we've kind of come full circle. It's the problem, the fact the West doesn't have a coherent criticism of the Taliban because the West is too afraid to talk about the implications of believing in Islam and the implications of Islamic theology, for example. China, you'd say it's very obvious what China's goals are. China are going to continue doing what they've been doing for ages, Sinization, going in, basically spreading their values, spreading their culture, spreading their traditions to try to assimilate the world, basically. I mean, that's kind of like the Chinese geopolitical grand strategy. Assimilate into their civilization, basically. That has historically been what China has done. And, you know, at least they have a thing that they're doing. At least they have a goal. What has the West got? What's our plan? We're going to establish liberal democracy in the Middle East. Really? No. It's just, I just don't care. Like, that's kind of the thing. I'm ending on this, but I'm just saying, like, literally, thank God there are so many problems in this country, because it means that I don't even have to pretend that I care about, like, what's happening halfway across the world. Let's just focus on the problems here. Anyway, that's kind of the end of the video. Whoever accurately guesses what theory of international relations I subscribe to gets pinned. Apart from that, please do like, share, and subscribe. I guess, like, I kind of touched on gender politics in some sense at the beginning of this video, but most of it was just, like, geopolitical, so whatever. I'll give Amazon a final mention because I'm recording this before my birthday, so, you know, if you send it to me, I'm probably going to do, like, the kind of roundup of all the presents that I've got, or all the, I don't know, it seems weird to call them presents, but they are presents. They're gifts. And I've got already, I think, 3 already, so that's good. And that's, like, enough to make a video, but if people want to give more, then that's awesome and fine, and thank you, and I really appreciate it. But apart from that, if you want to give on Patreon, then you do support what I'm doing here, and that's really great. So for now, I'll just say thank you to my current patrons. Aside from the names scrolling by right now, I'd like to give a special thanks to last month's patrons: Rachel, Radek, Furiosa, Laurie, Alex, Rachel, Molly, Stanley, Leah, Banner, Ayukabi, Chloe, Brittany, Mary, and Sheridan. You're all very appreciated.